Okay, here's one of the hubs. Actually, it's the driver's side hub off of the haul truck. As you saw in my previous chapter, chapter 59, I explained the trials, tribulations, and what I went through trying to get the straightness factor down to. Originally, I thought the axles weren't parallel with each other, or the rear axle wasn't parallel with the front axle. It was off, but it turned out to be an erroneous measurement. I had actually measured it off of the axle hubs, and it was far better than I had originally thought. So in the last chapter, I kind of left you with me taking the hub off on the passenger side to start the brake bracket removal so that I could, I had talked about in that chapter, the analog, the disc brakes had to be swapped from the front where they would have been into that torque bar suspension or torque bar bracket to the rear of the rotor. Instead of being in front of the rotor, I was going to switch them to the rear of the rotor, and that would have required me to kind of swap sides with them so that the brackets would work and I could go from there. So let's start out this chapter by me starting to remove the brake brackets from the passenger side hub. Welcome to the haul truck build, chapter 60. I tried loosening these with the impact and won't touch them. Half-inch impact. Okay, passenger side, you just saw me take it off. I had to use a long ratchet. I've got a half-inch drive ratchet. It's probably got a 2-foot handle on it. I tried to use the impact. Now, I tried to use the impact on the bolts because I wouldn't be able to get the impact on the back side, but the bolt side. Now, always when you are trying to undo a bolt, not the nut, but trying to take the bolt out of the nut is always going to be tighter than trying to take the nut off. So that could have been part of the factor, but they wouldn't come off with the impact. So I ended up using that long ratchet, kind of a breaker bar type of thing. But anyways, I got it off. Now what happened is the battery died on the camera. It was stuck on there. I just took the old dead blow hammer, just tapped a little bit, and it came right off. Now, in chapter 59, one of my viewers asked if I could just rotate this a little bit if the hole spacing was right. Well, what the issue is where the analog brake sensor goes through, there is actually a sleeve that protrudes out from the thing. So as you can see, it has a larger hole, so it goes through there. So no, I cannot rotate it. What they ask, if instead of flipping them over to the back, if I just unbolted it and rotated it a little bit, it would get that hydraulic line away from the torque rod bracket. And it probably would have, but would have gotten the maybe the bleeder up too close to this bracket. So what I'm going to do is just continue on with what I said. So this bracket will come off the passenger side and is flipped around, and now is going to be on the driver's side with a brake caliper in the back of the rotor. So there we are. Wonder what that 4306 written on there is. Looks like it was written on there with a Sharpie. Did they have Sharpies in 1974? Anyways, did they have Sharpies in 1974, or has this been replaced at some point in time? Oh, I'm sorry. This axle is actually out of a 2006. Yeah, stupid me. Sorry. I was thinking about the old axle that came off of the truck. But anyways, yeah, so I'm going to go over. I've got to pull the hub off the other one. The hub has never been off, so I've got to go through the chore of taking that hub off on the other side. Bring you back. What I'm doing is taking the brake caliper off, and I don't remember. These calipers are way different than like a automotive caliper. They're only held on by one bolt, and I don't exactly remember how it was on the other side. So two things here, kind of letting you see it as the project. But the other thing is just to kind of, yeah, now it's all coming back. It slides in. Kind of a reference for me to know how that it went on. I think that what it is one of those washers that will lock around the nut, and it's key. There's a key slot in the axle housing, and what it is it catches on the threads. Kind of a pain in the ass to get out. I'm sorry, keeps that axle nut secured. There it is. It's just tight fit, and it's got peened over tabs that go around the axle nut. With this nut. Okay, sometimes it can be a little bit of a bitch to get these hubs off. What I did is just pounded on it with a dead blow hammer a little bit. What you need to do is break that seal that's on the back side of it. There's that seal, and that's kind of what holds it on hard, but I got it off for okay, there we are. I got to break the bolts on the that's holding that bracket for the brake caliper on, and we'll see what it looks like from switching the sides. Just as kind of a little side note, I'm going to take this hub over to the bench and put it on the bench because I've got to get that other bearing and seal out of there, replace the bearings and the seal in the hub. So I'm just going to take that over to the bench, put it on the bench, and then come back and take care of this. I'm not going to put this on permanently. I'm just making sure that the bolt holes line up okay and that the caliper is going to work in that position. So you see what the issue is this thing is going to be right next to this arm, the trailing arm of this suspension. And this is the one that's going to be most subject to moving up and down as the air springs are loaded and unloaded. It's going to bring this arm up and down, whereas it being in the front by that torque rod bracket, should be no movement there. If any movement at all, it would be extremely slight. So what to do? Let me ponder the situation for a while. So when you're going through a project, you get you get your hopes up, and then your hopes get diminished, and you think that you've solved a problem, and you really haven't, and only to find out that you probably really have solved the problem. And what I'm talking about is what happened is you saw from the previous clips of the video how I took this brake bracket off and switched it over to the other side. Well, you know what I did? I switched the brake bracket over to the other side, but then I grabbed the caliper from this side instead of switching the caliper from the other side over here. And I come over here and I'm thinking, man, here is the outlet for the brake line going in here, and it's going to be right into this arm. And so I go through the process of thinking, you know, it is near that arm, but if they made a 90 for a brake line, I could put that 90 in there and just run the brake line around it. So I kind of went searching for a 90, which apparently some people say that they don't make. I went to an auto parts store, Napa auto parts store, and there's a guy in there that is very knowledgeable. He's worked in the auto parts industry for a long time, and he says, you know, I'm not sure if they make them. Well, first of all, I didn't get him. He was actually in the back making a hydraulic hose. So I got some other guy, and he went searching for me to try and find a 90 for it, and he was in the back forever. And finally Mike came out and says, what is he looking for? And I says, I need a 90 for this thing. And he says, they don't make 90s for that. But make a long story short, that wasn't a waste of time, because I kind of found out something about threads on brake lines. This happens to be 7/16, and they make both 7/16 20 threads, pitch thread, and 24 pitch thread. So it turned out to be, but anyways, I came back here, was kind of discouraged, and then thought, you idiot, you never switched the caliper from side to side. So let me bring you back here. I'm going to shut you off, and I'll put the other caliper on that came off of the passenger side. This is the driver's side. This is the driver's side caliper. Let me switch the caliper, and I'll show you the issue, or show you what that does. And here we are back again, and the caliper from the passenger side is over here, and dummy me, I should have realized it on the other thing. Now the bleeder valve is on top, the feed is on the bottom. So this is the way it would go. But now there is a other issue, and I'm gonna I'll explain it to you in a minute, but there's going to be another issue, and I kind of thought about this while I was taking it apart when I was thinking about it, and I think I have addressed this in another clip about how these brakes are not like a conventional brake and not held on the same way. It's kind of a V-notched fit on the bottom, and then there's one bolt on the top that holds it together. And I was kind of thinking about that arrangement when I was taking it apart and how it worked, how it held together that way. And somebody brought up a point, one of my viewers brought up a point, kind of a go-to guy that I thought of, brought up this point, and I was thinking exactly about this point. And what I'm going to do is I'll take you over to a little sketch that I've made, and I'll show you exactly what the point is. Just note that with this bracket, that the bolted thing is on top, and let me go over to a sketch and we'll explain what the issue with that is. Okay, so here's a little sketch that I've done, and this would be, so let's say this is the axle hub over here, and this would be the bracket that holds the caliper. The front of the truck is this way, so this is like the driver's side, and this is the original bracket location on the front of the axle. And I told you that in another clip that these brakes, the calipers aren't held on like you would think conventional or auto calipers are held on. using a bracket and a couple of slide bolts. These brackets are held on by like a V-notch. So the caliper actually kind of fits over this and then goes up and has another little V-notch it's out of proportion, but so over here there's like a gib that fits in here that holds it tight, and then there's a plate that comes in here with a bolt. And it holds it. So as the wheel is spinning and you're moving forward, it's rotating like this. So when you apply the brakes, the pressure on this caliper is forcing the caliper down into this notched V bracket. So it's making the fit tighter into the bracket. The caliper is actually being forced into the bracket. If I switch this thing around, now the front of the truck is that way. No, that won't work. I'm gonna have to draw you another drawing. Let me bring you back. Okay, so basically here is the other drawing. You've got the center of the axle in front now, and the caliper and the bracket are going to be in the back side of the wheel or the hub. So now what you have is the bolt is up on top still. The bolt would be up here. And the tapered or V-notched fit would be on the bottom. But what the issue arises here is, on the original one, is it rotates down and you apply the brakes, it forces that caliper into that V-notch. Here, the rotation is this way. As you apply the brakes, it has a tendency of trying to pull the caliper out of that V-notch. So when I originally took a look at how they had constructed this thing on the truck, and I thought that was pretty ingenious. They've got that one bolt, and because it rotates that way, as you apply the brakes and that the rotor is rotating that way, it's actually forcing the caliper into the bracket. I never thought about the bolt being on top. If I switch the brackets from side to side, the bolt would still be on the top. What I need to do is get that bolt on the bottom so that the same effect is happening. So it would be switched around, the bolt would be on the bottom, and it would be forcing, this part would be up here. It would be, as you applied the brakes going forward, it would be forcing the caliper up into the bracket instead of pulling it away and forcing it into the bolt. Now, what the problem with this is, even though it's V-notched, it's not as tight as a fit, and there's a gib in here, like a steel shim that goes in here that holds it, and what you would be doing is forcing it against that steel shim So I don't know, you know, is that a huge issue? It probably is. What, you know, what it could cause, what I was thinking it could cause is chatter. If if it tries to pull this away a little bit, you might get chatter in the brakes. I mean, the worst case scenario is this could come out. So that's the absolute worst scenario. You would lose your brakes. That would come out of the V-notch. Not sure if that could actually happen or not, because the V-notch is pretty big. And I don't think that the gib that's up here that holds it tight, even if you lost that gib, I don't think the gib is as big as the V-notch on the bottom side of it. But could you potentially get chatter out of here? If this thing, it would have a tendency of pulling that caliper away from the bracket and create a gap in there, which could pulsate with, well, you're not going to get, it could create chatter. I was going to say you're not going to get pulses because it's not any like brake, but you still could get chatter in there. It's something I've got to think about, and I'll show you what the issue is in a second here. Okay, so again, I just showed you that sketch and told you what the issue was, and just to kind of show you, this is what that gib is, and it's actually a piece of spring steel. So that's why we don't want it being forced against this, because again, it's just a piece of spring steel being held in by this little bracket and this bolt. So we don't want the pressure of the brake caliper being forced against that and away from the wedged V-notched part of the bracket. So I told you that. Now just keep in mind, I'm gonna, in all transparency, I'm gonna show you me trying to figure out how I can resolve this issue. And just keep in mind that I have switched the brackets from one side to the other, as well as the calipers. So I've got that in mind, and I'm trying to figure out how I can get that either caliper repositioned in another location to avoid this issue, or get it in back so that the when I apply the brakes, it's forced against the V-notched wedge of the bracket. But just keep in mind, my stupidity here is that I have switched sides and have that issue with that sleeve for what was the anti-lock brake system, and we'll continue on. So there's a couple of issues here. This originally was the bracket from the driver's side, and it's over here. I've got it over here, but again, the bolt would be on the top. So, you know, some people would say, well, just flip it over, but you can't do that because the bracket is offset. If I flipped it over, it would put the caliper thing in the back, which wouldn't hit the rotor. So my other issue is this one hole in the top of the axle housing flange is larger, and that accommodates this sleeve that was inserted into the caliper bracket to hold the anti-lock brake sensor. the issue is I can't rotate it off a little bit. In other words, maybe I could have. Let me take you back over to the other side here a second. I'm going to shut you off. I'm going to take this over to the other side and show you, but let me shut you off a second while I do it. So here would be my other option. This is the bracket that was just on the passenger side, and I brought it back over here. I've taken the other bracket off and put it back on the way it originally was. So again, I have that sleeve and that larger hole, but I guess what I could do is maybe possibly mill that sleeve thing off of there and see if I can rotate it enough to get the brake line interference that originally was into that bracket away from that. So what I'm going to do is just kind of set it up temporarily. I'll leave that sleeve there and just stick the bolts through there to kind of hold it in place, and then see if that will work. But let me bring you back again. Okay, it's too painful to watch. I can't show you the rest of my stupidity. But let me tell you that I finally figured it out, and the camera wasn't rolling when I did figure it out. All I had to do was take the bracket from the right side that was on the right side and just rotate it back without the sleeve being there. So let's go to the sleeve issue and getting that removed from the bracket. Okay, so in more not thinking, what I did is I came over here and told you that I had to mill those sleeve things off of there. Well, I brought it over here and I set it up on the rotary table because it wouldn't fit in a vise, and I was going to mill it off, and I says, well, wait a minute, let me just take a hacksaw and cut the majority of it off first and then mill it flush over here. So I set this thing up, but then I went over to hit it or get it with the hacksaw in the vise, and let me take you over there. So I brought it over to the vise and I was going to cut it off with a hacksaw, and I just hit it with a hammer and the thing pounds right through. And I'm thinking, again, I didn't think. Instead of using my head to think about how this thing was put in to begin with, I went this complicated route, and lo and behold, it's just press fit in there, pounded right out with a hammer. But anyways, stupid Fred. Okay, so we're back over here to the truck, and this is after the brake bracket had been reinstalled. What I had to do is, because I took those sleeves for the anti-lock brake sensor out, I had to get another bolt to put in there, and I kind of wanted to get a bolt that matched it. So let's start that segment, and then I'm just going to show you a couple of brief clips about getting these things reinstalled. So what I did is went out to Fastenal and got 2 bolts and nuts. They are 16 millimeter 2.0 thread pitch. I got them so that they would kind of match on the back side. These flange nuts, I got them so that they would match on the back side, because that's what you'll see for the guy that does the inspection. I just don't want to bring attention to it. These are, that's all I could get. They didn't have flange bolts, but they will be buried underneath the hub anyway. So I'll bring you back in shorter clips. Okay, so that process was repeated on this side, the driver's side. Just Loctite torqued him down. I actually torqued him to 150 pounds. I don't know if there's a spec on it. I don't have a manual. Well, I have a manual for another truck. Maybe I'll just kind of look in that, make sure I've got it good enough. But where we're going from here is I've got to get those bolts out of the trailing arm on the airbag bracket and get that set across there, get a couple of new bags. I'll put the calipers, the hubs back on, and get a couple of tires on some of the rims that I've got, a couple of drive tires, and get them, I'll put them on so that I've got a rolling chassis, and we'll go from there, get in preparation for maybe test fitting that sleeper onto the back of the truck. But I'll bring you back. Thanks for watching, guys. Hit that like button, subscribe, share it if you think somebody would be interested.